stories only God could write, true testimonies of faith, miracles, revelations, life-changing encounters, the missionary, and the power of God in action. Get ready to be moved, to be inspired, and to renew your hope and your faith.
Where do you go when the only home you've ever known feels like a prison, and the freedom you crave is found in the arms of a stranger? This is the story of Sarah. When she was 18, Sarah wasn't bad. She was just restless. She lived in Harmony, a tiny, quiet town in rural Pennsylvania, with a mother, Eleanor, who loved her with a strict, protective love. Sarah saw that love as a chain. She was vibrant, she was smart, and she was tired of curfews, tired of rules, and tired of hearing, "That boy isn't right for you." Sarah's true rebellion centered around Jake. Jake was everything Harmony wasn't. Exciting, unpredictable, and entirely his own boss. He was a few years older, drove a beat-up car, and promised Sarah the world outside of her mother's carefully manicured garden. The final fight was loud. It was about Jake, about a late night, and about the sheer, suffocating control Sarah felt. "I need to live my own life, Mom," she'd screamed, slamming the door. Eleanor had stood silently, her face a mask of fear, not anger. But Sarah didn't see the fear, she only saw the restriction. That night, she made a choice that would haunt her for half a decade. Under the quiet, cold Pennsylvania moonlight, Sarah and Jake packed one duffel bag between them. They slipped out the side door, leaving behind a hastily scribbled, defiant note. They drove west, chasing the bright lights of Pittsburgh, certain they were headed for a life of adventure, independence, and pure, unfettered love. The first few months were a thrilling, cinematic blur of cheap motel rooms, late-night dinners, and the giddy feeling of being completely freed up. Fast forward 5 years. The bright lights of the city had faded into the perpetual gray of a rundown, cramped apartment near the industrial district. Sarah, now 23, wasn't free, she was trapped. The adventure had curdled. Jake's charm had dissolved into a dangerous instability. He'd lost his job, the drinking started, and the anger was always simmering just below the surface. She was sitting on the thin, stained carpet, listening to the familiar, terrifying sound, a key fumbling in the lock. Jake was home, and he was drunk. Again. Sarah's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't need to see him to know the night ahead would be unbearable, perhaps even dangerous. As Jake stumbled in, yelling before his coat was even off, Sarah didn't fight. She didn't argue. She just moved, grabbing the small backpack she'd pre-packed, the only thing she owned that was truly hers. She slipped out the fire escape door and into the raw, unforgiving darkness of a new reality. She was running again, but this time it wasn't towards a dream. It was running for her life. The next few weeks were a brutal lesson in true independence. Sarah bounced between cheap shelters and working double shifts at a diner, trying to disappear. Jake wasn't looking for her, thankfully, but she was a shadow, gaunt, exhausted, and constantly looking over her shoulder. The thrill of freedom had been replaced by the paralyzing fear of exposure. The excitement of running away had been a lie. The truth was that she'd run into a cage of her own making. Every morning, when she scrubbed the grease off the diner floor before dawn, she felt the weight of her choice. She was surrounded by people, yet utterly alone. She stopped looking at her phone. She couldn't bring herself to search for her mother, Eleanor, fearing the shame and judgment. What would she even say? "Hi, Mom, remember that guy you told me to stay away from? You were right, and now I have nothing." Late one evening, sitting on a cold park bench, a scent of lilac drifted on the wind. A scent she hadn't consciously smelled in years. It was Eleanor's perfume, the scent of her mother's small, tidy garden back in Harmony. Suddenly, the image of her mother's face on that last night wasn't angry or restrictive. It was just sorrowful. Sarah allowed herself to cry for the first time in 5 years, not just for the misery Jake had caused, but for the loving, steady anchor she had foolishly cut loose. She realized the rules hadn't been about control, they had been about protection. That moment of deep, profound regret gave her a clarity she hadn't possessed before. She wasn't Jake's victim. She was simply Sarah, and Sarah was a survivor. She decided she wouldn't run anymore. She would face the consequences. But as she planned her next move, preparing to maybe call a distant aunt or a former friend, A sudden, sharp wave of nausea hit her. She dismissed it as stress, but the moment passed, leaving a strange, undeniable flicker of dread. The next afternoon, as Sarah sat on the steps outside the rundown apartment building where she used to live, she'd come back to see if she could quickly grab her old ID. A woman appeared. She was neatly dressed, holding a simple Bible, with a smile that was both gentle and intensely knowing. This was Miriam, a traveling missionary. Miriam approached Sarah not with pity, but with purpose. "Sarah," she said, her voice soft but firm, "God woke me up this morning. He showed me a vision of a young woman, suffering and in grave danger, sitting on these very steps." Sarah's eyes widened, her guarded facade cracking. She had never seen this woman before. Miriam sat beside her, not preaching, but simply speaking a powerful truth. "It's time to stop running. Your mother is waiting. The danger around this place is closing in, and you must leave now tonight." Miriam then reached into her purse and pulled out a substantial roll of bills. "Enough for a long bus journey, food, and a clean slate. This isn't for me, dear. It's your ticket home. Don't look back." Sarah, stunned and humbled, took the money, leaving Jake and everything behind. She knew the time for hesitation was over. She had a bus to catch. But as she stood up to leave, the wave of nausea returned, bringing with it a certainty that was both terrifying and utterly life-altering. Sarah was on the Greyhound bus, the glow of Pittsburgh shrinking in the rearview mirror. The cash Miriam gave her felt heavy in her pocket, but the weight that truly consumed her was the profound secret she hadn't even realized until the last 24 hours. She gently placed her hand on her abdomen. She wasn't coming home just as the rebellious daughter who ran away. She was coming home as a mother herself. She was 4 months pregnant with Jake's child. This was the great, terrifying twist. The child was an innocent life, a beautiful future, but it was also a concrete reminder of the mess she had made. She hadn't left Jake alone in that apartment. She had carried a piece of him, and a piece of her painful past, right back to her mother's doorstep. The journey was a blur of anxiety. Every mile brought her closer to harmony, and every moment magnified her fear. She imagined Eleanor's face, not just the disappointment from 5 years ago, but a fresh wave of shame as she saw her daughter return, broken and pregnant. She rehearsed the apology, the explanation, the inevitable judgment. She braced herself for the anger, "Though I told you so," and the cold, hard condition that would surely come with any help. The bus finally pulled into the familiar, quiet station. Sarah stepped off, feeling the clean, cold air of harmony. She walked the few blocks to her childhood home, the path lined with the same old maple trees. The porch light was on. As she stood on the doorstep, the girl who had run away, defiant and naive, was gone. The woman who stood there was humbled, broken, but fundamentally transformed. She had learned the true cost of recklessness, the value of stability, and the crushing loneliness of a false freedom. She raised her hand and knocked. Eleanor opened the door. There was no anger. There was no judgment. There were only tears. Eleanor didn't say a word about Jake, about the note, or about the 5 lost years. She didn't even seem to notice the exhaustion etched onto Sarah's face. She only saw her child. "My baby," Eleanor whispered and pulled Sarah into a massive, healing hug. It was the deepest, most unconditional embrace Sarah had ever known. A few moments later, as they sat in the quiet kitchen, Sarah, still tearful, finally confessed, "Mom, I'm pregnant." Eleanor simply took Sarah's hand, smiled through her tears, and squeezed it tightly. "Then we'll build a crib," she said. "We'll figure it out, just the 2 of us. You're home, Sarah. That's all that matters." Sarah finally understood. True freedom wasn't running away from her mother's rules. It was having a safe place built on unconditional love to run to. Her future was uncertain, messy, and complicated, but for the first time in 5 years, it was grounded in love, forgiveness, and the silent promise of a new life, one that she wouldn't have to face alone. The greatest rebellion of all is accepting the unconditional love you tried so hard to outrun.